The passenger in 8A hadn't moved in 3 hours. Her uniform, a faded diner waitress outfit with Margie's kitchen stitched above the pocket, was wrinkled from a double shift that ended at midnight. The red-eye from Denver to Washington carried the usual mix: businessmen scrolling through phones, families heading home, a few soldiers in civilian clothes. No one paid attention to the exhausted woman with calloused hands and graying temples, her face pressed against the window as she slept. At 37,000 feet, Flight 447 cruised through darkness over Kansas when the first alarm sounded in the cockpit. Captain Robert Henley's hands tightened on the yoke as his co-pilot, First Officer James Park, cycled through diagnostic screens. "We've lost hydraulic pressure in System 2, Park reported, voice steady but concerned. The Boeing 757 carried 183 souls through the February night. In the cabin, passengers barely noticed the subtle shift in engine tone. The woman in 8A stirred slightly, her trained body responding to changes others couldn't perceive. Her fingers, scarred from burns that looked like kitchen accidents to casual observers, twitched against the armrest. She'd been flying commercial for 16 hours, returning from her father's funeral in Colorado, the last family she had left. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Henley's voice filled the cabin with practiced calm. "We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties. Nothing to worry about, but I need to ask, are there any pilots aboard? Commercial or military, we could use an extra pair of eyes up here." The request was unusual enough to wake several passengers. A young man in 12C half raised his hand, mentioning he had a private license, small aircraft only. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking, asking. They passed 8A twice before the woman opened her eyes, gray-green like a winter ocean, alert despite the exhaustion. "What type of technical difficulty?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying an undertone that made the flight attendant pause. "The captain didn't specify, ma'am. Are you a pilot?" The woman straightened slowly, working out the stiffness from sleeping upright. Her name tag read Vera, nothing more. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, tired face, no makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that had seen better days. "I flew some," she said finally. "Military." The flight attendant's expression shifted to relief. "Would you come with me, please?" As Vera stood, she left behind a worn paperback, Yeager's autobiography, margins filled with technical notes in precise handwriting. Her movements were economical, controlled. Other passengers watched her walk toward the cockpit, this unremarkable woman in a waitress uniform, wondering what qualified her to help. They didn't notice how she automatically checked emergency exits, counted rows, or how her breathing had already shifted to match the cabin pressure changes that suggested something more serious than minor difficulties. The cockpit door sealed behind her with a mechanical whisper. Outside, lightning flickered across distant clouds, illuminating the vast darkness of the Midwest below. The real story was about to begin, though no one in that cabin could have imagined how a waitress from a highway diner would become the difference between disaster and deliverance. No one knew that Vera was just what they called her at Margie's, where she'd worked for 3 years pouring coffee and avoiding questions about her past. Captain Henley turned as she entered, his expression skeptical until he saw her eyes, those eyes that had seen things most pilots only experienced in simulators. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Henley. You said military." "Air Force," Vera replied, already scanning the instrument panel with an intensity that made Park shift uncomfortably. 16 years, retired 3 years ago. She didn't mention the medals in a storage unit she hadn't opened since leaving service. Didn't mention the call sign Ghost or why she'd earned it over Baghdad's skis. "What did you fly?" Henley asked, though something in his tone suggested he was reassessing his initial doubt. "Started on trainers, T-38s, moved to F-16s. She paused, fingers hovering over the diagnostic display. "Then A-10s, close air support." The weight of those words, close air support, hung in the recycled air, Every military pilot knew what that meant, flying low, slow, and angry, bringing death to protect those on the ground. Park whistled low. Warthogs, that's serious hardware. But Vera wasn't listening to the appreciation. Her attention had locked onto the hydraulic readings, the subtle shudder in the airframe that shouldn't exist at cruising altitude. "This isn't just System 2, she said quietly. "Check your rudder response." Slowly. Henley's face paled as he tested the controls. The aircraft responded but sluggishly, fighting him. "How did you?" "The harmonic, feel it. That frequency means you're losing fluid faster than the gauges show, probably a cascading failure." Her voice remained level, almost detached, but her mind was already running combat scenarios, calculating glide ratios, memorizing terrain below. "How long since the first warning?" 12 minutes. Then we have maybe 20 before total hydraulic failure, less if the leak accelerates. She looked at both pilots, seeing fear beginning to creep into their professional composure. "I've flown without hydraulics before. Different aircraft, but physics is physics. You're going to need someone who's landed broken birds." The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of electronics and the whisper of wind against aluminum skin at 500 miles per hour. Through the windscreen, stars painted the upper atmosphere while below, darkness swallowed the earth. Somewhere behind them, passengers dozed or read or worried about meetings tomorrow, unaware that their tomorrow hung on decisions being made in the next few seconds. "Ma'am," Henley started, protocol warring with pragmatism, "I can't officially—" "I'm not asking for official anything," Vera interrupted. "I'm a waitress from Denver who serves coffee to truckers, but 5 minutes ago you asked for pilots. I'm here. We can debate credentials while this aircraft becomes a very expensive glider, or we can work the problem." She met his eyes directly. "Your call, Captain, but decide now." Henley looked at Park, who nodded slowly. Outside, the first traces of turbulence began to shake the airframe, weather moving in from the west, another complication in an increasingly complex equation. The captain made his choice, gesturing to the jump seat. "Show me what you see." Vera strapped in with movements that spoke of muscle memory, of countless hours in cockpits far less forgiving than this one. As she reached for the radio headset, her sleeve pulled back, revealing part of a tattoo, wings, and a date, 9/17/2019, numbers that meant nothing to Henley but everything to her. The day she'd stopped being Major Vera Kostova, decorated combat pilot, and became just Vera, coffee pourer, anonymous survivor of wars both foreign and domestic. "First thing," she said, voice shifting to the clipped efficiency of military communication, "we need to declare an emergency and start looking for alternate fields. This bird's hurt worse than she's showing." Her fingers found the radio frequency selector with unconscious precision. "And Captain, when this is over, I was never here. Clear." Before Henley could respond, the master caution light illuminated, casting amber shadows across their faces. The hydraulics weren't just failing, they were gone. 183 souls hung suspended between earth and sky, their fate resting in the hands of 3 pilots, 2 who'd trained for this moment but never lived it, and 1 who'd lived it but spent 3 years trying to forget. "All right," Vera said, something cold and familiar settling into her voice, the sound of someone who'd made peace with death long ago. "Let's see if we can't keep this bird in the air. Captain, maintain heading. Park, start the auxiliary pump, but don't expect miracles. I need Kansas City Center on the radio now." The transformation was subtle but complete. The tired waitress was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. Her eyes tracked multiple instruments simultaneously, while her hands moved with surgical precision across controls she'd never touched in this specific aircraft, but understood through deeper knowledge. This was muscle memory carved from 1,000 hours over hostile territory, where mechanical failure meant more than inconvenience. It meant fire and metal and choices no one should make. "Kansas City Center, this is United 447, declaring emergency," Henley transmitted. his voice professionally calm despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Total hydraulic failure, requesting vectors to nearest suitable runway, souls on board 183, fuel remaining 4 hours. The response crackled back immediately, controllers snapping to emergency protocols. But Vera was already thinking ahead, calculating angles and distances, wind speeds and weight distributions. "We need to inform the cabin crew," she said quietly. "Prepare them for manual gear extension, possible rough landing. Don't panic them, but they need to know." Park looked at her with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "You've done this before, landed without hydraulics." "Twice," she replied without elaboration, though her mind flickered to a Syrian desert, an A-10 held together by prayer and duct tape, 30 Marines waiting for close air support she had to abandon to save her own life. The guilt of that survival still woke her at 3 a.m., sending her to the diner for early shift because sleep meant remembering. The aircraft bucked suddenly, a violent reminder that physics cared nothing for human plans. Without hydraulics, every control input required massive physical effort. Henley's arms already showed strain, fighting to keep the aircraft level. "I can't hold this for an hour," he admitted through gritted teeth. "You won't have to," Vera replied, unbuckling her harness. "We're going to set up a rotation. And Captain, with respect, you need to let me take the controls soon. Not because you're not capable, but because I've got more hours fighting wounded aircraft than anyone else on this plane." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've brought home birds that shouldn't fly. Let me bring home yours." The next several minutes passed in controlled chaos. Vera worked with both pilots to establish a system, trading control duties to prevent exhaustion while she managed communications and calculated their best options. Every available airport within gliding distance was evaluated, wind conditions assessed, runway lengths memorized. The passengers remained largely unaware, though a few noticed the changed engine sounds, the subtle but persistent banking that suggested something beyond routine flight. In the galley, the lead flight attendant, Margaret, felt her phone buzz with a message from the cockpit. "Prepare for emergency landing procedures. Maintain calm. Trust the pilots." The plural caught her attention, pilots, not pilot and co-pilot. She glanced toward first class, wondering about the tired woman in the waitress uniform who'd walked into the cockpit and hadn't returned. "Ghost Rider, this is Ghost Actual." The words escaped Vera's lips without thought, reverting to military radio protocol. She caught herself, but not before both Henley and Park registered the call sign. Ghost. In the fighter community, call signs were earned, usually through embarrassment or failure. But sometimes, rarely, they came from something else, something that set a pilot apart from mortality itself. "Did you just call yourself Ghost?" Park asked, unable to hide his curiosity even as he struggled with the throttles, trying to maintain speed without hydraulic assistance to the control surfaces. Vera's jaw tightened. Old habits, focus on the aircraft. But the damage was done. The word hung between them, a key to a locked past she'd spent 3 years burying under coffee grounds and small talk with truckers. Ghost. Because she'd survived when physics said she shouldn't, because she'd appeared from nowhere to save ground units who'd given up hope, because she could disappear into the sun and strike without warning. "Wait," Henley said suddenly, recognition dawning. "Ghost, Vera Kostova, you're the Kandahar Ghost, the A-10 pilot who's trying to help you land this aircraft." Vera cut him off sharply. "Whatever you think you know, save it. Right now, I'm nobody special, just someone who knows how to wrestle dying aircraft." Her voice carried an edge that ended the discussion, but both men now looked at her differently, not just as a military pilot, but as something approaching legend. The Kandahar Ghost. Every Air Force pilot knew the story, or versions of it. An A-10 pilot who'd held a position alone for 6 hours, out of ammunition, using her aircraft as a psychological weapon, engines screaming over Taliban positions to keep them pinned while Marines evacuated wounded. Who'd landed that warthog with half a wing gone, one engine dead, hydraulics shot to hell. Who'd received a Silver Star and then disappeared from service 3 years ago without explanation. But knowing who she had been didn't change their current situation. If anything, it made it more surreal. The most decorated close air support pilot of the Afghanistan conflict was wearing a coffee-stained Waitress uniform, helping them fight a wounded Boeing through Kansas airspace. The universe, Park thought, had a twisted sense of humor. Runway selection, Vera said, dragging them back to immediacy. Kansas City International's our best option. Long runways, emergency equipment, straight approach from our current heading. We'll have to fly manually, no autopilot, no assisted control. It's going to be like wrestling a drunk elephant, but it's doable. Doable, Henley repeated, tasting the word. You make it sound simple. Simple and easy aren't the same thing. Vera's hands moved across the navigation display, plotting their approach. Simple is physics, angle, speed, distance. Easy is having systems that work. We have simple, we'll have to earn easy. Over the next 20 minutes, they developed a rhythm. Vera took primary control, her smaller frame belying the physical strength required to move the control surfaces through mechanical linkage alone. Every input required full-body commitment, shoulders and core engaged, sweat darkening her uniform. But her movements remained precise, economical, wasting nothing on panic or overcorrection. United 447, Kansas City approach, the radio crackled. We have you on radar, cleared direct, runway 19 available, emergency vehicles standing by. Copy Kansas City. Be advised, we'll need the full length. Manual gear extension, no brakes until nose-wheel contact. Vera's transmission was textbook calm, but her mind raced through contingencies. No hydraulic brakes meant relying on reverse thrust and prayers. One shot at this landing, no go-around capability without hydraulics to retract gear manually extended. In the cabin, Margaret made her announcement, voice steady despite her racing heart. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has informed us we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Kansas City due to a mechanical issue. This is a precautionary measure. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened, seat backs upright, and follow all crew instructions. The words unscheduled landing and mechanical issue rippled through the passengers like electricity. The businessman in 4C immediately began texting his wife. The mother in 23A pulled her sleeping children closer. Everyone suddenly became aware of the aircraft's unusual movements, the constant small corrections that suggested manual flight. But in 8A, Vera's empty seat told a different story. Her book remained where she'd left it, margins filled with notes about angle of attack, lift coefficients, the mathematics of flight that she couldn't stop calculating even in retirement. 3 years of pouring coffee hadn't erased 16 years of combat aviation. You could take the pilot out of the Air Force, but the sky never really let go of those who danced with death among clouds. 15 miles out, Park announced, monitoring their descent rate against distance remaining. Altitude good, speed. We're fast. We need the speed, Vera replied, making another adjustment that required her full strength. Momentum's our friend without hydraulics. We'll bleed it off over the runway. She paused, feeling the aircraft's response through her hands, through the seat, through some sixth sense developed over thousands of hours. Captain, I need you to handle throttles. Park, call out speeds and altitude. I've got the stick. What she didn't say was that she was flying by feel now, by instinct honed in darker skis than these. The 757 was wounded but willing, responding to her touch like a horse accepting a new rider. She could feel its weight, its balance, the way air moved over control surfaces that no longer had power assistance. This was pure aviation, the kind Wright brothers would recognize, human will against gravity, skill against physics. 10 miles, Park called, runway in sight. Through the windscreen, a string of lights appeared, the approach lighting system of runway 19, a golden path through darkness. Vera allowed herself one deep breath, compartmentalizing everything, the funeral she'd attended, the father she'd buried, the wars she'd survived, the guilt she carried. None of it mattered now. Only the next 10 miles existed, the space between crisis and resolution. "Gear extension," she commanded. "Manual override." Henley reached for the emergency gear release, a handle rarely touched outside training. The mechanism engaged with a grinding thunk that resonated through the airframe. One by one, landing gear fell and locked into position, adding drag that made the aircraft buck like a living thing. Vera rode the turbulence, adjusting, compensating, her entire existence focused on maintaining the glide path that would bring them home. United 447, you're cleared to land, winds calm, emergency vehicles positioned, Kansas City Tower transmitted. Good luck. Luck, Vera thought, had nothing to do with it. This was training, experience, and the stubborn refusal to let physics win. She'd fought gravity over Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, places where landing meant survival, where failure meant more than personal consequence. This was different but the same. 183 souls, including the child she'd heard crying in row 30, the elderly couple holding hands in 15B and C, the young soldier in uniform trying to make it home. 5 miles, Park announced. Altitude good, speed 200 knots. Too fast for normal landing, but normal had ended with the hydraulic failure. Vera felt the aircraft wanting to porpoise, the natural instability of manual flight at low altitude. Her corrections were constant, precise, a conversation between human and machine conducted through control surfaces and aluminum skin. She was flying the aircraft, but more than that, she was willing it to fly, imposing order on chaos through pure determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret's voice filled the cabin again, "we're on final approach. Brace positions, please." The command sent a chill through the passengers. Brace positions meant impact, meant danger beyond routine. Parents held children tighter, strangers reached for strangers' hands, prayers were whispered in a dozen languages. But none of them knew that their lives rested in the hands of a woman who'd spent 3 years trying to forget she was one of the best combat pilots her generation had produced. 3 miles. The runway grew larger, details resolving, the numbers 19 painted in white, the touchdown zone markers, the 1,000-foot markers that would measure their success or failure. Vera could see emergency vehicles flanking the runway, red lights flashing in the pre-dawn darkness. The tower had cleared all other traffic, giving them the entire airport, every resource focused on their arrival. "Speed 180, Park called, tension creeping into his voice despite his training. "Sync rate 700. A little high, a little fast, but within parameters. Vera made micro-adjustments, feeling the aircraft respond slowly, grudgingly. Without hydraulics, every input had a delay, a lag between command and response that required anticipation, prediction. She was flying 3 seconds into the future, knowing what the aircraft would need before it needed it. 1 mile, Park announced, 1,000 feet. The automated voice joined him, 1,000. This was it, the commitment point. No hydraulics meant no go-around capability once they were this low, this slow. They would land on runway 19, or they would land somewhere else with catastrophic results. Vera felt the familiar calm that had earned her call sign, the absolute peace that came with accepting all outcomes while working for only one. 500, the automated system announced. "Speed 160, sync rate 500, Park reported, his voice steadier now, drawing strength from Vera's unwavering control. The runway rushed up to meet them, perspective shifting from approach to arrival. Vera could see the marks left by previous landings, the rubber deposits that told stories of other aircraft, other moments of contact between Earth and sky. In seconds, they would add their own story to that narrative. 100. 50. 30. Vera pulled back on the yoke with everything she had, flaring the aircraft to reduce descent rate, trading speed for altitude in the last precious feet. The nose rose, blocking her view of the runway, forcing her to fly by peripheral vision and instinct. This was the moment that separated pilots from aviators, the ability to feel the earth approaching through subtle changes in air pressure, ground effect, the cushion of compressed air beneath wings. The main gear touched with a chirp of rubber, harder than normal but survivable. The aircraft bounced slightly, once, twice, before settling. Vera fought to lower the nose gently, knowing that without hydraulic brakes, the nose wheel touchdown would be their only initial speed brake. Nose wheel down, Henley announced as the front gear made contact. Reversers now. Vera's hands flew to the thrust reverser controls, deploying them fully. The engines screamed in protest, redirecting their force forward, fighting momentum with pure mechanical power. The aircraft shuddered, decelerated, but still ate runway at alarming speed. The 1,000-foot markers flashed past, then the 2,000, 3,000. Half the runway consumed, speed still dangerous. "Come on," Vera whispered, the first words she'd spoken that weren't operational commands. "Come on, girl, stop for me." As if responding to her plea, the aircraft began to slow more dramatically. Physics finally favored them, weight, drag, and reverse thrust combining to bleed energy from their hurtling mass. 4,000 feet, 5,000, speed dropping through 60 knots, 50, 40. Controllable, survivable. At 6,000 feet of runway used, with 5,000 remaining, United Flight 447 came to a complete stop. For a moment, silence filled the cockpit, the absence of engine thrust, the cessation of alarms, the end of crisis. Then from the cabin behind them a sound began. Applause. Tentative at first, then building to thunder. 180 passengers expressing relief, gratitude, the joy of unexpected continuation. Henley and Park sat stunned, hands shaking with adrenaline aftermath. But Vera was already moving, unbuckling, preparing to leave. "Captain, you've got your aircraft. Emergency vehicles are approaching. You'll want to evacuate as a precaution. Hot brakes, possible fire risk." "Wait," Henley said, finding his voice. We need to." "You need to take care of your passengers," Vera interrupted. "I need to disappear before someone realizes who I am and makes this complicated." She pulled off the headset, ran a hand through her sweat-dampened hair. "Tell them you and Park handled it. Leave me out of the reports." "That's not right," Park protested. "You saved everyone you deserve." "I deserve to go back to being nobody," Vera said quietly. "Trust me, recognition isn't always a gift." She moved toward the cockpit door, then paused. "Captain Henley, you would have figured it out. Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as smoothly, but you would have gotten them down. Don't let anyone tell you different." Before either man could respond, she was gone, slipping out of the cockpit as emergency slides deployed and evacuation began. In the controlled chaos that followed, nobody noticed the woman in the waitress uniform who walked calmly down the emergency slide, declined medical attention, and vanished into the crowd of evacuated passengers. But Margaret noticed. The lead flight attendant watched the woman who'd entered the cockpit as a tired waitress and emerged as something else, someone who'd carried command authority like a worn jacket, comfortable and familiar. Margaret had seen enough military personnel to recognize the bearing, the way Vera moved through chaos like it was her natural element. She made a mental note to check the manifest later, to put a name to the mystery. On the tarmac, Vera stood apart from the other passengers, watching the sun rise over Kansas City. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving her with the familiar hollow feeling that followed survival. She'd flown again, really flown, not just operated an aircraft but fought it, convinced it, brought it home through will and skill. For 20 minutes she'd been Ghost again, the pilot who could make broken machines fly through sheer determination. Her phone buzzed, the diner, wondering if she'd make her afternoon shift. She texted back that she'd be late, maybe tomorrow, family emergency extended. Margie would understand. Margie always understood, though she never asked the right questions about the burns on Vera's hands, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, or why a woman with her obvious intelligence was pouring coffee for truckers at $65 a shift plus tips. The evacuation complete, Passengers gathered in the terminal, some crying, others calling loved ones, all processing their brush with disaster. The businessman from 4C was already composing a LinkedIn post about leadership under pressure. The mother from 23A held her children and thought about statistics, probability, the randomness of survival. The young soldier stood at attention, recognizing something in the way events had unfolded that spoke of military precision. Inside the terminal, Captain Henley faced the media that had already gathered. He explained the hydraulic failure, the successful emergency landing, the professional response of his crew. He mentioned that a passenger with military flying experience had provided consultation but declined to elaborate, respecting Vieira's wish for anonymity. The story he told was true but incomplete, a victory of training and procedure rather than the intervention of a ghost. But First Officer Park couldn't let it go. During a break in the debriefing, he pulled out his phone and searched Kandahar Ghost, Major Vera Kostova, A-10 pilot Silver Star. The results painted a picture of someone extraordinary, not just a decorated pilot but a legend in the close air support community. Citations for valor, testimonials from ground forces she'd saved, analysis of her tactics in aviation journals. And then, 3 years ago, nothing. She'd simply vanished from military record, an honorable discharge with no explanation. One article included a photo, Vera in flight suit, standing beside her A-10, the aircraft's nose art visible, a ghostly female figure riding a thunderbolt. Her expression in the photo was intense, focused, the same look she'd worn while wrestling the 757 to safety. But something was different in her eyes. They were alive with purpose, not yet carrying the weight Park had seen in the cockpit. Find something interesting. Margaret appeared beside him, having completed her own evacuation duties. Park showed her the phone. Our waitress, she was something else. Margaret studied the photo, comparing it to her memory of the exhausted woman in 8A. Trauma changes people, she said quietly. Sometimes heroes just want to be normal again. But she can't be normal, Park protested. She just saved almost 200 lives. She should be recognized, celebrated. Maybe that's exactly what she's running from, Margaret suggested. Not everyone wants to be special. Sometimes the bravest thing is choosing to be ordinary. Meanwhile, Vera had found a quiet corner of a coffee shop, not Margie's, but similar enough to feel familiar. She ordered black coffee, no sugar, and sat watching normal people living normal lives. A businessman rushed past, late for something that seemed important. A young couple argued about wedding plans. A child dropped an ice cream cone and cried while his mother promised another. This was what she'd saved, not statistics or passenger manifests, but people with stories, futures, disappointments, and dreams. Once, over Afghanistan, she'd saved 30 Marines whose names she never knew. Today, she'd saved 183 civilians whose names she'd never know. The number didn't matter. The act did. The choice to engage, to step forward when stepping forward meant accepting responsibility for lives. Her phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. She almost didn't answer, then curiosity won. Hello. Major Kostova. The voice was male, military, crisp, familiar in its formality. I'm not a major anymore, Vera replied carefully. Who is this? Colonel James Mitchell, Whiteman Air Force Base. I'm sorry to bother you, but I just received a call from a Captain Henley. He was very insistent that I know what happened this morning. Vera closed her eyes. So much for anonymity. I asked him not to. He didn't violate your request, Mitchell interrupted. He didn't mention you by name, but he described the flying, the techniques used. There aren't many pilots who could have done what was done, fewer still who would know to do it, and only one I know of who would then try to disappear. What do you want, Colonel? To say thank you, and to let you know that if you ever want to fly again, really fly, not just emergency situations, there's a place for you. Consulting, training, anything. The Air Force lost something special when you left. The Air Force lost nothing, Vera said firmly. It gained a reminder that everyone's replaceable, Someone else flies those missions now. Someone else saves those lives. But not like you did. Exactly like I did, or better, that's how it's supposed to work. She paused, choosing her words. Colonel, I appreciate the call, but I'm done. I gave everything I had to those wings. There's nothing left to give. I understand, Mitchell said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But Vera, can I call you Vera? What you did today suggests there's more left than you think. After ending the call, Vera sat in silence, processing. 3 years of anonymity, shattered by one hydraulic failure. 3 years of pretending the sky didn't call to her every time she heard engines overhead. 3 years of pouring coffee and avoiding questions, dissolved in 20 minutes of crisis. But something else had dissolved too, the weight she'd carried since her last combat mission. That final flight over Syria, when she'd had to choose between saving Marines under fire or continuing to provide cover for a medical evacuation. She'd chosen the medevac, and 3 Marines had died. The official report called it the right decision, more lives saved than lost. The medals called her a hero, but she'd never forgiven herself for the mathematics of survival, for playing God with other people's futures. Today had been different. Today, there was no choice between lives, no terrible calculus, just physics and skill and the determination to bring everyone home. Maybe that's what she'd needed, not redemption, but reminder that sometimes flying could be purely about salvation. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Park. Got your number from the manifest. Thank you doesn't seem enough, but it's all I have. If you ever want to talk about what really happened over Kandahar, I'll buy the coffee. Vera smiled despite herself. What really happened over Kandahar was classified, traumatic, and ultimately irrelevant. But the gesture touched her. She texted back, "Some stories are better left untold. Take care of your captain. He's a good pilot who had a bad day. We all have them." The sun climbed higher over Kansas City, painting the sky in shades of blue that reminded her of morning missions, that perfect light that made even war look beautiful. Somewhere, Captain Henley was finishing his reports, carefully omitting her name while praising an unnamed passenger with military experience. Somewhere, 183 people were continuing their lives, most unaware of how close they'd come to ending. And somewhere in the distance, she could hear aircraft engines, commercial jets following their prescribed paths, mechanical and predictable. But she also heard something else in those engines, something only pilots heard. The promise of flight, the eternal invitation to leave Earth behind and dance with physics in the thin air above. She wouldn't go back to the Air Force, wouldn't reclaim her uniform or her call sign or the identity that had defined her for 16 years. But maybe she didn't need to disappear completely either. Maybe there was space between ghost and nobody, between hero and waitress, between the sky and the ground. Her phone rang again. Margie, the diner owner, her voice warm with concern. "Vera, honey, I heard about some plane thing in Kansas City. You okay?" "I'm fine, Margie, just delayed." "Take your time. Bereavement's hard. Your dad would be proud, you taking care of his affairs and all." Vera almost laughed at the unintended accuracy. Her father, career Air Force, 20-year veteran of Strategic Air Command, would indeed be proud. Not of the funeral arrangements or the estate settlement, but of this morning. Of his daughter doing what he'd trained her to do from childhood: fly, fight, and never leave anyone behind. "Hey Margie," Vera said suddenly, "you know that flight school out by the county airport, the one that's always leaving flyers?" "Sure, honey, why?" "Maybe I'll check it out when I get back. Might be nice to fly a little. Small planes, nothing serious." "That sounds wonderful," Margie replied with the enthusiasm of someone who sensed healing in the words. "You do what makes you happy." After hanging up, Vera stood and walked toward the terminal windows where she could see Flight 447 surrounded by emergency vehicles, investigators already beginning their work. The aircraft looked wounded but intact, a testament to Boeing engineering and human determination. In a few weeks, After repairs and inspections, it would fly again. Machines, like people, could be fixed. The media had arrived in force now, cameras pointed at the aircraft, reporters speaking earnestly into microphones about miraculous emergency landing and heroic crew actions. They'd never know the full story. Nobody would. The official report would describe a successful crew resource management response to catastrophic hydraulic failure. It would praise Captain Henley's leadership, First Officer Park's support, the cabin crew's professionalism. It might mention